welcome to the Geek Legion of Doom. This is going to be a tag video for my own tag video. So a little while ago I did the Sword and Sorcery tag, a genre which is, I've got to be honest, fairly niche. That you don't really, there's plenty of horror channels out there, there's plenty of sci-fi channels. Is there any Sword and Sorcery movie channels? I don't think there is. I mean, there might be some dedicated to certain franchises like Lord of the Rings, but generally speaking, this kind of small genre is somewhat kind of niche and forgotten. I was a huge fan of it, and I'm hoping to do this tag in hopes of having conversations with it. I know that when I did my original tag video, I didn't put my answers in because I didn't want to influence people's answers on their own, but I did want to kind of like say my answers. And since I've done my original video, both Aaron from Screenstars and Grumpy Andrew's House of Horror have both done tag videos, and I will leave their responses in the description below, so please go check them out. And if you haven't already, obviously go and subscribe to those guys, because there's some really interesting answers there. So I'm going to give my answers now to my own tag video. I'm actually going to add an additional question, because there's one I thought of since then. And I'm going to tag a couple more people at the end. I have no idea if these people are actually interested in Sword and Sorcery movies, but I'm hoping they might be. I know one of them will be, but I don't know if he'll do a tag, so we'll give it a go. However, this is an open tag because we don't talk about this genre very often. I really don't know who among you is a fan of kind of Sword and Sorcery flash fantasy movies. You know, Army of Darkness is counted as a fantasy movie, so you probably have seen a few. So I'm going to give my answers now, and hopefully we can have a conversation. And let's go from there. So my first question, number one, and I'll leave the questions in the description as well, so you can kind of see them. What is my favourite Sword and Sorcery movie of all time? It's a tough question because I do like quite a few of them. But for me, I have to think how many times have I kind of rewatched something, and that's going to be Beastmaster, the first movie. Mark Singer, who plays Dar, the Beastmaster, the title character. I think this is a wonderfully dark Sword and Sorcery movie that kind of takes its subject matter. It's very pulpy, but it takes it somewhat seriously and kind of gives you a a fairly serious take with kind of a fairly dark elements in it. And it doesn't follow the kind of a normal kind of 3-act structure in a lot of ways, because it ultimately has two villains in it that are sort of taken in different kind of sections of the movie, which I thought was quite interesting. It's a very different way of doing it builds up one villain, then switches us to another one for the kind of the middle portion of the movie, and then we have the kind of like it circles back to the original villain. I thought it was quite cool. And I just like the world that it kind of builds. And I mean, we had a couple of sequels and a TV series, none of which obviously compared to the original, but Beastmaster is my number one. The worst Sword and Sorcery movie that I've seen, I'm actually going to give you two, and there's a reason for this. Probably objectively, the worst Sword and Sorcery movie I have seen that I can kind of think of is one called Dragon Crusaders, and this was actually put out by the Asylum. The Asylum's a very small, cheap kind of like film studio, and what they put out is normally a load of old crap, to be quite honest with you. And this, they do have a few OK films, but this was not one of them. It's a very, very poor, rubbish CGI dragon and all of that. Very kind of poor movie. I think I gave it a 2 out of 10. But I will say another movie as well, because this should have been better because it had a lot higher budget, and that was the original Dungeons and Dragons movie. It was so poor. It was so kind of like not really anything like the kind of the actual role-playing game was like. Wasn't representative of at all, and a complete waste of the license. But we're going to mention Dungeons and Dragons again. This to me is the next question is the most fun question, if you ask me, and I've probably given this far too much thought than I should have done. If I had to pick 4 Sword and Sorcery characters to go on some type of mystical quest, who would I pick? And I've got a squad. I'm telling you, this is the squad you're going to want. Number 1, it would actually be Dar, the Beastmaster. So he is actually a kind of barbarian character, like sort of Conan and that kind of thing, like the Italian sort of barbarian films that you had. But you've also got the added advantage with him that he has control over animals. So you've got a competent swordsman and a kind of like, you know, your kind of barbarian type who's, you know, proficient with the sword. He's also got this kind of like throwy thing that he really doesn't use in the film too much, but he does have it. But yeah, he can control, and he hangs around with like the tiger. You know, he's got an eagle, he's got a pair of ferrets, and he can basically control animals apart from horses. But yeah, so he's very kind of useful in two aspects. So he kind of really fills two roles in that one. My second one, this will take a little bit of explaining. It will be Gorbash. And now Gorbash is a dragon from the movie Flight of Dragons, which is an animated movie, but it is somewhat kind of, it takes a sort of fairly adult, mature approach. Now, you can easily say, oh, have He-Man from, you know, the TV show, but that's so far removed from anything kind of remotely kind of mature. You know, you could just imagine sort of He-Man being next to kind of the rest of these sort of characters, and he kind of would stand out as very sort of silly, quite frankly. So I'm kind of putting He-Man aside, can't have that one. Gorbash, although he is from an animated film, the actual the film is taken seriously. But here's the thing with Gorbash: he actually has two personalities in the film. So which one do you pick? So Gorbash, in the Flight of Dragons, the dragons are intelligent, they can speak, they can communicate in English and stuff like that. Gorbash is a kind of a young, brash dragon who has been brought up by this kind of wizard. But then within the movie, he's kind of, the personality of this scientist from our world gets transferred into his body. So then you have the personality of this guy, Peter, who's like a sort of scientist or something, go into the body of a dragon. So you've got a human scientist brain with a dragon body. So which one do you pick? Because obviously the original Gorbash personality knows how to be a dragon and can kind of, you know, obviously has a lot better kind of control over things like fire and stuff like that, and flight. Although Peter Dinklage, although he has less mastery of the actual art of being a dragon, he can still use it, although somewhat clumsily. But he also has a kind of a scientific mind, and that can be helpful as well. So I would probably go with the Peter version of Gorbash, if that makes sense. So the Gorbash character, but with Peter's mind, because you get the advantages of having a dragon, plus the kind of the brains of a scientist, which might come in handy. But you are sacrificing a little bit on dragon skills there. See, I told you I thought about this one. The next up, we're going to have a character called Crow.
Greetings.
You should have given him the gold. He would have returned the abbess and left us to live in peace.
The peace of the dead.
Now he's from the movie Hawk the Slayer, which is a, you know, it's a very cheesy British sword and sorcery movie. Now Crow is your kind of your distance fighter. He's essentially an archer. He's very kind of in the same kind of vein as Legolas from the Lord of the Rings films. But he has this kind of like ability, and it's kind of cheesy in the film when you look at it. But he fires off this bow like machine gun quick. So it's just basically kind of like hammering out these arrows super quick, and it's essentially like having a machine gunner on your team. And he's cool. He's very kind of like quick and kind of nimble. So Crow would be number 3, and then as both Andrew and Aaron printed said in their ones, you want to have some type of magic user as well. Now Andrew pointed out that Gandalf is probably the obvious choice, but he tends to go off and does his own thing, which is probably true. So I would maybe go for Merlin, obviously from a variety of different kind of adaptations of King Arthur. But let's go with Excalibur. It's probably the most one. He's a bit younger, so he's a bit more kind of, able to kind of get around. He does have quite powerful magic. He's maybe not as powerful as Gandalf, but I feel he might kind of stick around a little bit more and kind of be a bit more helpful. So that is my squad of people who would go on a quest with. Okay, if I can pick any weapon from a sword and sorcery movie, what do I pick? And what I'm talking about is not a replica, but like the actual thing. So if you could have the real like magical war, whatever it is, directly from that film universe, what would you have? And I would actually have Excalibur because nothing is more well known in the fantasy genre as an item as Excalibur. Yes, it does have, as Andrew pointed out, some responsibilities with it, but hey, King Leo, that's all I'm saying. So yeah, it'd be Excalibur. What Sword and Sorcery IP needs a reboot or a remake? Now, I mentioned this one earlier, and this would be Dungeons and Dragons, because outside of Lord of the Rings and probably now Game of Thrones, the biggest franchise name that you have out there in the kind of the fantasy genre is probably Dungeons and Dragons. It's a very, very well-known thing, and people have heard of it, even if they're not kind of Sword and Sorcery fans. It is a name that people are going to recognise, and the movie was atrocious. It was absolutely atrocious. Now the issue becomes with Dungeons and Dragons, because it's such a massive, broad world about what could happen in it, is where do you go from it? I'd probably be inclined to actually take a leaf from the animated TV show and do something along the lines of that, so it's a little bit kind of, well, there's a pre-existing narrative, and you're not just kind of like left with this kind of very just broad open space to do whatever you want. I mean, there are novels and stuff which you could adapt on the other hand, but I would maybe go with, maybe not an exact adaptation, but like based off the kind of the cartoon show. I think that'd be fun. Okay. What is your favourite Sword and Sorcery TV show? Now, the obvious answer here is Game of Thrones, and it really is a great show that I really enjoy. But there's been one show that I've really kind of enjoyed for many, many years, and that is Robin of Sherwood. Obviously based on the legend of Robin Hood. Now, like I said, some people may argue this isn't Sword and Sorcery, but if you've seen this show, there is wizards, so there's witches in it, there's demons, there's Lucifer that's in it. So there are kind of mystical elements within this kind of show. There's all sorts of stuff that happens in that show that is kind of otherworldly. So it counts as a Sword and Sorcery movie, or series, if you ask me. But that is my favourite TV show, probably of all time. And yeah, I probably have watched it more than Game of Thrones. Even though Game of Thrones is excellent, I would say overall that is probably my favourite. A little shout out to Legends of the Seeker, which I also kind of like. With a few exceptions, this is the next question. With a few exceptions, the Sword and Sorcery is traditionally one of the most un-PC genres going. And where do I see this genre going, if anywhere, and what would I like to see? So what I mean by this question is, if you think about going back to the days of Conan, Red Sonja and all of this, it's always kind of, you know, you have your alpha male, you know, with kind of the women that are just kind of all kind of dressed up in skimpy clad clothing. It's very kind of like of its time. And in modern 2019, when I'm kind of doing this video, that stuff would be tagged as sexist, misogynistic, whatever you want to see it. In the reality that we live in now, with the films that were made in the kind of the 80s, which was the Sword and Sorcery heyday, you know, look at things like Deathstalker, Amazons, Warrior Queen, all that kind of stuff. They would get torn apart if they came out now. And we do have Sword and Sorcery films that come out now, but they don't have that kind of that sort of that un-PC kind of edge to them like they did. I gotta be honest with you, I actually kind of like it. You know, it is what it is. I kind of like that kind of that classic Sword and Sorcery fantasy. That if you've seen the Heavy Metal magazine, you kind of know what I mean. Yeah, I appreciate. You know, some people may see it as not politically correct, but hey, I like it. So for me personally, I would not like it. You know, I like the kind of the way that it has been, but I appreciate in this modern times it is probably not realistic to expect anything like that now. Do I have any special editions of any releases of any Sword and Sorcery movies on Blu-ray or DVD, or any merchandise that I would kind of want to show? No, I don't collect merchandise. I have no merchandise outside of a few Funko Pops, none of which are Sword and Sorcery. But I do have a few editions of some stuff which I will show you. So I have quite a cool edition of Red Sonja. This is a Korean one, which has this kind of Korean slip, and it's limited to like 500 copies. I think this is by Nova Media. I'm not really sure why I bought this, to be honest with you, but there you go. It is what it is. From Germany, I got this Deathstalker media book. And this one, I think, is limited to like 2,000 or something like that. And they've announced Deathstalker 2 as well, which I have pre-ordered. So I'm hoping they'll do the whole series and maybe even do like Barbarian Queen and all of that as well. And then I do have a few steelbooks. Willow. I'm not going to show them all, but I've got a few. I've got all the Hobbit movies on steelbook. Warcraft. I do have a couple of more obscure ones as well. There's a Thor-like sword and sorcery film, and I do have the Game of Thrones steelbook series as well. I've got the whole up to now the whole series of them. Okay, next question. What Hollywood actor would you cast as He-Man or She-Ra in a live-action new adaptation of a movie? Now I'll go with He-Man on this one. And I recently watched the movie Creed 2, and the guy who plays Victor Drago in that is called Florian Montague, and I would go with him. The guy is like an absolute beast. He's a monster. And Creed 2 was quite a high-profile movie, so he's kind of riding high off that. So he has that kind of like that recognition where people have seen him. And even though his role wasn't massive in Creed, I've got to say I actually thought he did a fairly good job acting there. And it's kind of fun because obviously he played with Dolph Lundgren, who of course was He-Man in the original live-action movie. So that's kind of quite fun. It's almost like a little bit of synergy there with those sort of characters. So he would be my pick to play He-Man. As for She-Ra, I honestly don't know at this point, if I'm honest. What is your favourite on-screen dragon? This could be TV or movie. So the most recent ones are probably going to be the Game of Thrones. Now, Grumpy Andrew said this the same answer that I'm going to say, but in case you didn't know, it's Vermithrax. Now, he's got, believe it or not, this has a surname as well that I can never pronounce. Pejorative. Vermax Pejorative, I think it's pronounced. I may have got that wrong. So, in the 80s, Disney co-produced with Paramount the movie Dragon Slayer, which is maybe, because it was a co-production, is maybe why you've not seen like a Blu-ray release of it. I don't know, but it's dark. It's a dark movie, and it actually stars Peter McNichol, who you may know as Janosch from Ghostbusters 2. He's our hero character, believe it or not. Now, the dragon in this movie is fantastic. Even back in the days, these days when it came out, the effects look incredible. George R.R. Martin, who obviously wrote Game of Thrones, said it was the best adaptation of any dragon that he'd seen on screen. So, that's kind of like, that's high praise coming from obviously the author of Game of Thrones. And they actually name-checked Vermithrax in this scene when they're talking about dragons of old. They actually have in Game of Thrones a dragon called Vermithrax, and this is where the name came from. So that is to me, the best dragon on film. Fantastic. I mean, it's a little scene film now because, like I said, it had a DVD release, but it's never been out on Blu-ray as far as I know, and yeah, it's kind of long forgotten. The actual film is a little bit boring, I've got to be honest with you. Until we get to the parts that directly involve the dragon, the film does languish a little bit, and is a little bit kind of slow in places. But when we get those dragon sections, ooh, it is good. And then the final question. This is a new question that I've added because I just thought of it after I'd done the original tag. Is there any kind of sword and sorcery films that you feel were underrated and are kind of you want to recommend to maybe an audience out there? And I'm going to give you two. One of them is a little bit of a cheat, though. And the first one I'm going to recommend is Orc Wars. And why this is a little bit of a cheat is this actually takes place in contemporary Earth. What it is, it's kind of like, if you can imagine like a portal opening up into Middle Earth, and all the orcs and such from Middle Earth come into our world and basically attack, contemporary humans. That's the kind of the premise of this film. It's a kind of cheesy B movie. It's made by Arrowstorm Entertainment, who do a lot of kind of like modern sword and sorcery films. But the orcs are straight out of Lord of the Rings. The design is straight out of Lord of the Rings. I mean, they maybe speak a little bit too good of English, but outside of that, and there's dragons in it, and there's all sorts of, you know, it's a really kind of like a fun movie. Not to be taken too seriously, obviously, but I thought it was just a fun, it's really fun to see these kind of like these really very, you know, Lord of the Rings, Weta style kind of orcs fighting modern humans. It's quite fun. The other one I'm going to recommend is Dungeons and Dragons 3. What? 3? You may not know that they have actually done 3 Dungeons and Dragons movies. Both of the sequels were lower budget and straight to video, but both of the sequels are better than the original. The second one is good, but the third one is significantly better. Now, the best way I would describe the third Dungeons and Dragons movie is kind of like Suicide Squad in a kind of a fantasy genre. So it's such a kind of a different sort of take on a fantasy movie. Ultimately, you have a group of villains of varying degrees of badness clubbed together to try and defeat a worse enemy. So it's essentially Suicide Squad in the middle, you know, kind of like in a fantasy setting. But because of that, the chemistry between the characters is really fun. And this was before Suicide Squad. The film came out, obviously the comic had been around for ages. There's some quite neat special effects for a low budget film. The characters, because they're kind of darker characters, are all quite fun and kind of interesting and not your cookie cutter, good guy kind of barbarians that you probably would have seen in, you know, in kind of a lot of kind of like sort of fantasy movies. So I would recommend that. Now, I'm going to leave this tag open. I have already tagged in my original video Screenstars, who have done a video, Grumpy Andrew's House of Horror, who has done a video, and then the Deadly Dames, who have yet to do a video. So I'm still hoping that they will do, although they haven't really made a video in a long time. So those tags are still out there. Anyone who wants to do this tag is more than welcome. I really encourage it. But I am going to tag a couple of people, and this I have no idea if these guys are interested in sword and sorcery. But Adam Paul Dumont, who you know, he seemed like he's my age, so I'm guessing he might have seen kind of some of these sword and sorcery movies. So I'm hoping you might be interested. Jambo Shango commented on Andrew's video, so I'm hoping that he has some interest in this as well. And the Wicked Boy, who he's never really mentioned anything about sword and sorcery films, but he's got such a big DVD collection. I'm surprised if he hasn't seen any. And the last person is the one person who I know is 100% into this, but I don't know if they'll do a tag video, and that is Paul from Buckaroo Banzai, my longest time contributor to this channel, but I don't know if he'll do a tag video because he said before that he won't. But I'm appealing to you, Paul. Come on, do the tag. You don't have to be on camera. Just show a picture of some stuff if you want. But I think I'm really curious to see your answers to this. Anyway, that is it. But if you want to do this tag and I haven't mentioned you, please go ahead and do it. Thanks for your time. Bye for now.